Hey guys, Jared here, and today we're going to build a gaming PC for under $1,400 US. Alright, so this computer is basically going to be used for all sorts of things, from gaming with medium to high settings at 1080p to just browsing the internet and watching YouTube. All the parts were purchased early in 2017, so I did this a few months ago. I've got separate videos on most of the hardware used here. Check out the links in the video description if you want more information on anything. For the CPU, I went with an Intel 6700K. The build was planned just as Kaby Lake was coming out, and after seeing some of the benchmarks of the 7700K, I decided going ahead with a slightly cheaper 6700K would still be fine for this build. Realistically, I could have saved over $100 by getting a lower tier CPU like an i5, but I was really keen to keep the CPU for ages, and the 6700K definitely has a lot of potential. At the time I was selecting my parts, for some reason there was a shortage on most decent coolers. I was after an air cooler and ended up going with the Be Quiet Pure Rock Slim. I wasn't sure about it at first. It's quite a small cooler, and the 6700K isn't exactly the coolest CPU around. The cooler claims to have a 120 watt TDP cooling capacity though, which should be enough, so I went with it. I haven't had any issues on stock speeds so far, but if I go ahead with overclocking the 6700K in future, I'll likely look at upgrading to a larger CPU cooler. As this is an overclockable chip, I needed a motherboard with the Z170 chipset. I went with the Gigabyte Z170 D3H motherboard. To be honest, I picked this up because it was fairly cheap compared to the other options, but still had everything that I needed, like an M.2 slot for the NVMe SSD. I went with a Samsung 960 EVO 500GB NVMe SSD, as I wanted something that would be insanely fast. I wanted Windows to boot in seconds, and games to open as quickly as possible. I went with 500GB, because with this SSD you're already paying heaps for the high speeds, so higher capacities are less worthwhile. It's still plenty of space for a few games, and although there is room to add larger hard drives, I didn't buy any as I've got a NAS for that purpose. For RAM, I picked two 8GB sticks of Kingston HyperX Fury memory at 2133 MHz, mostly because it was a good price for the speed and it looked fairly decent, which as you know makes it faster, right? This means that only 2 slots of the 4 available on the motherboard are in use, so we have the option to upgrade to 32GB in the future if needed. As for the graphics, I went with the Asus GeForce GTX 1060 Dual Fan Overclock Edition, which is a 3GB card. With this card I was able to reach around 60 frames per second in modern games on maximum settings without many issues. It performs great for its price, and this system was made with the intention of running games at 1080p 60Hz with medium to high settings, and this card definitely manages that. To power everything, I went with the Corsair HX850i power supply. It's an 80 plus platinum 850 watt power supply and definitely overkill for this build. I figured it was better to go a little larger than needed, just on the off chance that anything extra is added to the system in the future. The PSU spends most of its time running completely silent, with the fan off as it's not heavily loaded, which is an awesome feature. All of this hardware has been placed into the Antec GX1200 case. It's got some basic lighting effects, was a fairly decent price at around $75 US, and was a pretty good size. Not too big or too small. Alright, so now let's build this thing. I didn't have any major problems during the process. Just don't do what I always do and forget to install the RAM after the CPU cooler. Luckily, this cooler is so thin that the clearance wasn't a problem here, so I didn't have to take it off and start over. I also found that the PSU needed all required cables plugged into it first before screwing it into the case. There wasn't enough clearance to add them in afterwards due to the way that the case is designed, which was a little annoying. I think I did an alright job of cable management. Looks good enough to me anyway. I'm running Windows 10 on it, but I tested and was able to boot Fedora Linux, and it recognized all hardware out of the box with no issues, just in case you were wondering. Now let's check out some benchmarks. These benchmarks were done with stock speeds, no overclocking at this stage. In GTA 5, I've disabled VSync and ran my test with FXAA and MSAA set to 8, with a 1080p resolution using DirectX 11. With these settings, I was able to get an average of 83 frames per second. In The Witcher 3, I used the Ultra preset, disabled VSync and NVIDIA Hairworks, and again ran at a 1080p resolution. With these settings, I was able to get an average of 55 frames per second, so just under that 60 target. In Shadow of Mordor with Ultra settings at 1080p, we averaged 89 frames per second. In Heaven Benchmark with the quality set to Ultra, tessellation set to Extreme, and anti-aliasing set to 8 at 1080p, the 1060 averaged 61 frames per second. It's a similar story story in Valley Benchmark, with the quality set to Ultra and anti-aliasing on 8 at 1080p, the 1060 averaged 67 frames per second. I then ran both the Firestrike and TimeSpy benchmarks from 3D Mark, and got scores of 10,746 and 3,907 respectively. Not too bad. During my testing, the hottest that the graphics card got was 77 degrees Celsius in my room with an ambient temperature of 20 degrees Celsius. The fans didn't get noticeably loud either, so I could keep it even cooler as I don't have any problems with extra noise. I ran some of the tests again with the fans maxed out to 100%, and the maximum the card got to was 46 degrees Celsius, though of course it was a lot louder. The results of the tests also didn't change, confirming that the card was not thermal throttling. While performing the benchmarks or even just playing games, there was a slight but noticeable coil whine. However, I did have the whole system running on the desk right next to me, but I wasn't able to notice it with my headphones on. Luckily, even with my small CPU cooler, the temperatures there were fine too. I measured these at a different time, and with an ambient room temperature of 17 degrees Celsius, at idle the 6700K with a Pure Rock Slim was sitting at 21 degrees Celsius, and after being maxed out for over half an hour, it was around 60 degrees Celsius, so I'm pretty happy with that. The SSD was impressive too, with a sequential read speed of around 3,300 megabytes per second and a sequential write speed of around 1,700 megabytes per second. Kind of crazy. With the PC completely powered off, the system takes just 18 seconds to fully boot up to the Windows 10 login screen. So I think the performance here is pretty good. I'm definitely happy with it anyway. The PC performs great and was easy to assemble. All up, the whole system cost 1,860 Australian dollars, which is about 1,390 US dollars. Damn new conversion rate. To be fair, we probably also need to account for the Australia tax too. For some reason, hardware here is just much more expensive than it is in the States. So what did you guys think of my sub $1,400 US build? Overall, with the lighting effects, I think it looks pretty nice. The hardware is fairly decent and it runs great. Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments, including what you'd have done differently and why. And leave a like on the video if you found it useful. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for future tech videos like this one.